Welcome back to the Backwards History Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Will, here with my co-host, Kevin. Say hi, Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
Shut up, Kevin.
Sir, you dishonored me.
I dishonor you.
I challenge you to a duel.
Name the time and place, sir.
We shall duel at dawn.
What's my name, sir?
Aaron Burr, sir.
Then you will lose, sir.
Yeah, probably.
If any of you know history, which I'm assuming you may or may not, given the fact you're listening to us, you may have picked up on what we're putting down right there. But before we get into that and the explanation of that, I want to tell you to go and do those social media thingy things, like, share, subscribe, go review us on Apple Podcasts. Just like we noticed one of our happy listeners in Kansas. We won't name you, ma'am. We really appreciate that new review we got. But please, you want to review us? We don't care if it's 5 stars. We don't care if it's 1 star. Go give us a review. Give us your opinion. Email us at thebackwardshistorypodcast@gmail.com. Hit up our DMs or put it on our wall on the Backwards History Podcast Facebook page, Instagram, or our Twitter. Tell us what you think. We don't even care if you don't like us. But if you have a podcast, we'd love to debate you on the podcast or on your podcast. And even if it's not a debate, we would love some cross-platform conversation.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, definitely. But on that note, we wanted to take a step back from the craziness from today.
Yes, so much.
Or at least directly discussing the craziness of today, and go back to discussing another one of our founding fathers. This time, one that we don't necessarily hold at very high regard. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Mr. Alexander Hamilton. He did die in a duel with Aaron Burr, which Kevin called me Aaron Burr at the beginning of the podcast. But before that, there was a lot of other interesting things that went on.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's why we have an historian.
Thank you, Will. Alexander Hamilton is considered a founding father. He didn't hold the office of president because he died. You know, that tends to happen when you get shot. But as Will has said, prior to his death, he led a very interesting life. Mr. Hamilton's life began on January 11th. 1755 or 1757, it's not exactly known. People might be surprised to learn that celebrating birthdays is actually a very recent phenomenon.
We've talked about this in a previous episode.
So when you see in history books people like born about or circa or approximately, they're just taking their best guess. Now it's a little bit morbid on that because the infant mortality rate was so high that chances are many children weren't going to make it to adulthood.
You definitely mentioned that on a previous episode.
So Mr. Hamilton, he was born in what it was called the British West Indies, or the modern-day Caribbean, which means he was not born in the present-day United States. Now, he was born 55, 57, so time the revolution comes around, he's a relatively young man, and he enlists, and he eventually works his way up to being an assistant of General George Washington, which kind of helped start his political aspirations. I mean, if you can say, hey, I was assistant to George Washington, it might carry a little clout in certain groups, you know what I mean?
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit, you know, pad that resume a tad. During the revolution, he did serve as a soldier and was promoted to lieutenant colonel. Now, following the revolution, there's a conflict that this very brand new nation has to face. If you look back historically at trends, following any revolution, there's almost always a civil war that follows up. And many historians contribute that to, okay, we've eliminated the power that was in charge. Now we're going to have this internal struggle to see who leads now.
When you take out the existing power, there's always a power vacuum.
Exactly.
There's this hole in, okay, who's running stuff here? Who's going to take over? Who's going to be the one calling the shots. That's something, and we were trying to avoid current situations in this podcast, but I can't help but draw back to it. But the police typically have the run of the streets in any given area of the United States. Police being law enforcement, whether it be county or city or what have you. Mm-hmm. Then you have somewhere like Chaz or Chop. Police are gone. Who's going to take the reins? Someone with the cojones.
Yeah, more or less.
To step up and say, hey, it's mine.
I'm in charge.
Somehow Chop or Chaz decided, oh, this SoundCloud rapper is going to be the man.
Oh, Lord.
I can't even comment on how stupid that is.
This story just gets more and more absurd as the days go by.
But that happens in any area. That's the reason why you got Chicago as violent as Chicago is, because the FBI or the DEA or whoever came in and took out the top drug lords and stuff like that in the area. And the Bloods and the Crips and Latin Kings and all those were vying for the top spot. And that's why you've got the violence you've got there. Power vacuum always comes with fun stuff like Afghanistan. We remove the Taliban and ISIS rolls in or what have you. It's just how things roll.
It's just a natural flow of things.
Well, here in the U.S., we removed King George
III.
Yeah, I wasn't sure which one he was. And then the people of the United States says,
who's running this?
We're here. Who's the man? Who's the man? And Alexander Hamilton is on my bad side. As much of a constitutionalist as I am, I'm usually on the side of the founding fathers as a whole. But Alexander Hamilton is one of my least favorites because he was, oddly enough, and you never hear about this, but Alexander Hamilton was very much pro presidency for life or public office being inherited by posterity, i.e. children.
Which in modern day America sounds very un-American.
Well, actually, at that point in time, sounded very much like pro-monarchy, which is, even at that time, was very anti-American. You don't remove a monarchy to create a monarchy.
It does seem counterintuitive.
It does. And it seems like Alexander Hamilton's only focuses in his adult life were politics and the bane of our current existence, because we don't see any benefit of it, because we're just average Americans, money.
Oh, yeah. Big dollars.
I.e. money in politics.
Now, after the revolution's done, we have to, who's in charge? How are we going to run this? The forerunner to the Constitution was a document known as the Articles of Confederation. Oh, look at that word, Confederation, showing up early.
Confederation sounds oddly similar to Confederacy.
And this is happening
seems like
early.
Right. Seems like this issue may have been prior to the issue of slavery or secession. But no, it only lasted 5 years. What?
No.
That's a poke at the uneducated that are listening. But continue, Kevin.
Now, the Articles of Confederation, they were established with the more or less implied understanding that they were going to be replaced with something better. Now, Hamilton is credited with helping get the state of New York to ratify the Constitution. Now, he's what many people refer to as a Federalist. He was very, very much for a strong central government.
As opposed to someone we've already discussed, Mr. Samuel Adams, and vicariously his cousin, John Adams, who were very anti-federalist.
As the name would imply, an anti-federalist is one who is opposed to a strong central government. So, the American Revolution is a bit of an oddity in historic terms because it doesn't follow the trend of Revolution, Civil War. It's Revolution, 80 some odd years, Civil War. And it's the same issue that the Civil War dealt with later is who's in charge, who has the most power, states or the central government.
Was it Thomas Jefferson that said a country should have this is not a direct quote, this is paraphrasing, but you should have a revolution every 20 years?
I'm leaning towards Jefferson on that one.
That sounds more of a Thomas Jefferson quote.
So here we are, a young nation, and that we're trying to decide how we're going to do this. Now, Hamilton's claim to fame is a collection of essays called the Federalist Papers. Out of 85 essays, he's credited with 51, pushing for a strong central government, trying to convince people that that's what's needed. Now, outside of politics, Hamilton has another distinction that some people poke fun at, pun intended. He's widely regarded as being the first American politician to have an extramarital affair.
I was hoping that's where you were going when you said poke fun at. That was where I was going to go if you didn't.
Now, Hamilton married Elizabeth Schuyler, and they had 8 children, but he did have, it was revealed that he had an affair with Maria Reynolds.
Bruh, if you have 8 children, you're poking enough fun at your wife, dude. Like, why you need to go get extra?
And I don't know. Now, so outside of his political ambitions and his personal drama, most people are familiar with Hamilton based off the Broadway play, Hamilton. And
I'm actually unfamiliar. As much of a Broadway or a musical inclined person because I have a traditionally trained musician background. I'm actually unfamiliar with this.
I think Disney is releasing something. Anyway, Hamilton was the first Secretary of State. So he had already started his climb of, all right, I'm going to try to make it to the office of the presidency. He's very much on his way. As I mentioned before, a close personal friend with George Washington, first Secretary of State, helped lobby to get the Constitution ratified in the state of New York. He's very much a major player on the board. Now, he did have a professional rivalry with a former Vice President, Aaron Burr. And throughout their entire lives, let's just call them disagreements. They took shots at each other, and both figuratively and literally. Now, typically during this time, a duel never resulted, or hardly ever resulted, in harm or death. It was, you showed your honor by showing up to the duel, and most people involved would actually fire their pistols in the air or away from their target. Well, Aaron Burr didn't do that. He took aim, hit Hamilton, and he subsequently died. And so ends the story of Alexander Hamilton.
However, Mr. Hamilton did have one prior, at least notable, duel challenge accepted. Him and who would become the 5th president of the United States, Mr. James Monroe, actually met for a duel, and a very close representative or spokesman or whatever you would call him for Mr. Monroe, or President Monroe, given he got the office, so he deserves the respect, whether he was your president or not.
Fair.
He was never my president.
I wasn't alive at the time.
But President Monroe's representative using a modern term, squashed the quarrel between the two gentlemen. Thus, the duel never happened. Mm-hmm. And James Monroe would go on to become the 5th president of the United States. And Mr. Hamilton would go on to be shot dead by Aaron Burr. But he was no stranger to the situation.
Oh, absolutely not. I think he just got caught off guard, literally.
Yeah, it was probably one of those instances of, okay, I've been in this situation before. A lot of people have not shot me, and this is one guy happened to, and I was not prepared.
He's very much one of those what if kind of cases, because he was shot in 1804 during Thomas Jefferson's presidency. So it's like, well, could he have been the 5th president had he,
had he not been shot because of his stupidity?
So it's one of those what if moments in history people really like to kind of dwell on, like, oh, what would have happened had he not, been fatally shot in a duel.
Right. As I understand it, Mr. Hamilton's affair that you discussed resulted in him being accused of embezzlement because the individual that he was having an affair with happened to be married.
Oh, yeah.
And the husband happened to catch them in the act.
Hard to deny that one, isn't it?
And then extorted Mr. Hamilton for thousands of dollars, which $1,000 in that period of time was a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
But then that husband ended up getting arrested for something else. I'm not sure what. But then started to try and say, oh, I've got dirt on Alexander Hamilton. He's embezzling money. So in an attempt to clear his name for the embezzlement of United States funds, decided to air his dirty laundry in the aptly titled Reynolds pamphlet, being the surname of the husband and wife involved. Thusly, I guess, saying that his adultery against his wife and mother of his 8 children was less important than clearing his name from embezzlement in United States funds. Granted, given his public position, I think that stands a little bit more pertinent to his public position. Now, his adultery was him and his wife's business, but as far as the American people were concerned, his possible embezzlement of their money is a more dire concern to them individually, regardless of public perception of his actions. But Mr. Hamilton, the reason why we said, or at least I said at the beginning of the podcast, that he was my least favorite. Granted, he may have been misguided because he was a young man. He was the youngest person to sign the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
I do believe so.
But Mr. Hamilton was very much a proponent of a strong central government, not because of its governance, but because of its finances.
Money.
He was very much a proponent of a national debt and state debt, large state debt to that national government in order to garner credit from foreign governments, which, if history tells us anything, our first commander-in-chief warned against investment in foreign affairs and or debt to foreign governments.
He did. And during Washington's Exodus speech, where he was willingly leaving office, and essentially it's his riding off into the sunset of his political career.
His last moment to speak to the American people.
He warned against becoming entangled in foreign affairs and political parties. And he saw both as very detriment to the country and to the people.
Wow, that sounds nothing like 2020 America, because history is irrelevant. History is just the past, right?
Some people.
History means nothing. It doesn't repeat itself if you forget it, right? You can tear it down and burn it and whatever else, and it's going to just stay burned and torn down, right?
No, it's not.
But that's how it works, right?
That's how some people would believe you, or have you believe it would, but
not the Backwards History Podcast.
No. People today, in their complete and utter misunderstanding of history, it's one of those things that just it irritates me to the core. I see, I'm just going to call them stupid posts on Facebook. And the biggest one is referring to trying to defend the tearing down of statues is, oh, well, clearly those people who think they learn history from statues don't read books. And I would argue, well, no, those people who are tearing down statues are the ones who don't read history books.
Well, there's a statue of Alexander Hamilton in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
It offends me because it's the depiction of a proponent of national debt,
Mm-hmm.
which leads us to 1913
Mm-hmm.
with the Federal Reserve Act, which offends me because it's led us to some of the main financial issues we have today. It offends me, so I'm going to go tear it down.
Yeah, you shouldn't do that. Oh.
Exactly. Because Alexander Hamilton will still have existed in history. Alexander Hamilton's effects will still have been a part of our history. And no matter how much I tear his statue down, deface it, burn every book with his name in it, try and remove every bit of anything regarding Mr. Hamilton and his beliefs, however wrong, even though we're still doing some of the same stupidity we were doing under his tutelage, doesn't make him go away, does it?
No. I mean, once the bell's rung, that's it.
You can't unring that bell.
No.
And you can't unlisten to us.
Nope.
Even though if we tell you to go do your own research, don't take us as experts. Don't take anything we say as fact. Form your own opinions. And trust, but verify.